The heat lay over the fairground like a wet blanket that afternoon. So thick the flags on the poles hung limp as drowned things, and 1,100 people stood packed shoulder to shoulder around the sail ring, none of them speaking above a murmur. In the center of that ring stood a woman not yet 40, slight and sunburned, her hands folded in front of a plain cotton dress, and beside her sat a dog the color of dry oat straw, one ear torn to a ragged point, watching the crowd with eyes that had seen enough to be unhurried by any of it. The auctioneer had gone quiet. The man in the pressed gray suit from the Cattlemen's Protective Association had gone quieter still, and he was sweating through his collar. And he was watching that woman the way a man watches a card he had counted out of the deck. Every rancher in Three Valleys had come to hear what she would say, because in a season that had killed lambs by the thousand and broken men who had never been broken, this quiet woman and this common yellow dog held between them the one thing none of them could buy for themselves at any price. She had not raised her voice once in all the years they had known her. She did not raise it now. But before I tell you what she said, and what it cost her, and what it bought, you have to understand that the real verdict on this woman was not passed that day in the ring. It was passed 2 winters earlier, on a frozen county road, by a thing everyone else had already decided to let die. Her name was Marguerite Coyle, and she came into the Verrill Valley in the January of a hard year with everything she owned in the bed of a truck older than she was. She had $4,200 to her name, and she spent $3,800 of it on the old Price place. 160 acres of thin grass and cheat grass, and a house with a stove that smoked, and a barn with a swayback roof. Because nobody else would take it at that price, and because it was all she could reach. Her husband had died the spring before, of a thing the doctors named too late, and she had sold their house in the city, and settled his debts, and found herself with a widow's pittance and no one left who needed her. And she had decided with the flat certainty of a person who has stopped bargaining with grief, that she would rather fail at something real than succeed at nothing. She knew almost nothing about sheep. She had read books. Books are a poor substitute for a lifetime, and the men of the Verrill Valley knew it the moment they saw her, and they were not shy about their knowing. When she stood in the feed store that first week and asked, in her quiet, even way, what a body ought to pay for a starter flock of ewes, the room went from talk to snickering, and Deward Halbrook, who ran the biggest sheep operation in the valley and never let anyone forget it, tipped back his hat and said loud enough for all of them, that a woman alone on the Price place would do the county a mercy to sell the grass for hay, and go on back to wherever she'd stumbled in from. A woman alone. He said it like a diagnosis. And they laughed, the way men laugh when one of them says the cruel thing. The rest were only thinking, and Marguerite paid for her salt block and her fencing staples, and walked out without a word because she had learned already that being right is its own kind of reply. And she was not yet right, and she knew it, and so she said nothing at all. She bought her flock cheap, the way she bought everything, 62 ewes and a ram off a man 3 counties over who was quitting the business, animals that were sound enough but plain, and she trucked them home over 2 days and turned them out onto her thin grass and stood at the fence in the cold and did the arithmetic. That was the thing she did, always the arithmetic. She counted what she had against what she owed the days to come. 62 ewes, and if she was lucky and God was kind, she might get 80 lambs off them come spring, and of those she might raise 65 to sell, and at the going price, that was a sum that did not, no matter how she turned it, quite cover the winter's hay and the taxes and the note she still carried on the truck. The numbers came up short. They came up short every night she ran them, sitting at the smoking stove with a pencil in the back of a feed receipt, and the shortfall was always the same shape, and it had teeth. She was $200 a season from ruin, and she knew it the way you know a stone in your boot. And there was no version of the arithmetic where she was not. And then there were the coyotes. Nobody had told her about the coyotes, or rather, everyone had, but no telling prepares you for the morning you walk out in the gray light and find a ewe opened up along the fence line, and 2 lambs simply gone, not a scrap of them, as if the ground had swallowed them whole. The Verrill Valley ran thick with them that year, drawn down out of the high country by the same hard weather that had emptied it of easier prey, and they took from everyone from Holbrook and the Ostrander brothers and the little outfits alike. But the big operations had men and dogs and rifles, and could stand the losses. And Marguerite had a single-shot rifle. She could barely load, and no dog at all, and could stand nothing. In her first 3 weeks she lost 4 lambs and 2 ewes, and each one she wrote down in the ledger of the arithmetic, and each one moved the stone in her boot a little deeper toward the bone. She strung more wire. She lost more sheep. She sat up 2 nights, running with the rifle across her knees, and shot at shapes and hit nothing, and fell asleep at dawn, and woke to find another gone. And on the 3rd such morning, walking the far fence with her eyes hot and her hands shaking from cold and want of sleep, she came to the culvert under the county road where it crossed the dry wash, and she heard down in the dark of the pipe a sound so faint she thought at first it was the wind moving in the metal. It was not the wind. She knelt at the mouth of the culvert, that big rusted corrugated pipe half choked with old leaves and ice, and she looked into the dark and saw, back in the middle of it where a man could not have reached, 2 eyes catching the light, a dog, or what was left of one. But it had crawled in there out of the weather, she guessed, and gotten too weak to crawl back out, and it lay in the filth at the low point of the pipe, with its ribs standing up under a coat matted with mud and burrs. And when she spoke to it, soft, the way you speak to a thing that has no reason on earth to trust you, it did not growl and it did not whine. It only watched her, steady, with those unhurried eyes. And something in that steadiness went into her and would not leave. She went home for a rope and a strip of cold mutton, and she lay down in the wet gravel at the mouth of that pipe for the better part of 2 hours, talking low and holding out the meat, until at last the dog dragged itself the length of the culvert an inch at a time and took the meat from her fingers and let her slip the rope soft around its neck. It could not stand. She carried it out in her arms, and it weighed no more than a half-grown lamb, a dog that ought by its frame to have gone 80 pounds and did not go 40, and she carried it the half-mile to the house against her chest, and its heart beat fast and light against her ribs the whole way like something afraid to stop. She named him nothing at first, because you do not name a thing you expect to lose. She fed him broth off a spoon, and then off her fingers, and then when he could lift his head out of a pan, small amounts, and often the way she'd read you must. And she cleaned the wounds on him, the torn ear and the raw places on his legs where the wire had been, and she made a bed for him by the smoking stove out of an old horse blanket. And for 9 days she did not know, from one morning to the next, whether he would be alive when she came down. On the 10th morning he was standing. He was standing at the door with his ragged ear up and his tail moving slow, and when she opened the door, he did not bolt for the open country the way a wild thing would. He walked out into the yard and he lifted his nose to the wind coming off the pasture, and he stood a long moment reading something in it that she could not read, and then he sat himself down at the corner of the sheep pen and faced outward toward the wash, toward the high country, toward the place the coyotes came from. And he did not move from that spot the whole of the day. He was not her dog then. He was the pasture's dog, the flock's dog. And she saw it that first morning, and did not understand yet what she was seeing. But she stopped at the fence and did her arithmetic. And for the first time the numbers had a thing in them she could not price, and the stone in her boot sat a little easier for it. The valley, when it learned of the dog, laughed a second time, and the laugh was worse than the first. For it got about, the way everything got about, in the feed store and the church basement and the tailgate of every truck at the crossroads, that the widow on the Price place had pulled a half-dead mongrel out of a culvert and meant to set it to guarding her sheep. 2. And to the men of the Verrill Valley this was the richest foolishness they had heard in a year of foolishness. Guardian dogs were a known thing and a serious thing, they said. 'Tis. You bought them, bred for it, out of proven lines, the big white breeds from the old countries, Pyrenees and Anatolians and the like, and you paid dear for them, and you raised them from pups among the lambs, and even then, not 1 in 3 came right. You did not make a guardian out of road trash. You did not make one out of some starved gutter cur of no breed. Anyone could name a dog so far gone it had trawled into a pipe to die. Dilward Halbrook, when it reached him, laughed until he had to set down his coffee, and he said around the store that the widow had found herself a dog that couldn't even guard its own life from a drainage ditch, and now aimed to trust it with sheep, and that a body ought to feel almost sorry if a body had the time. And they had the time. They made the time. That summer when Marguerite came to town, there was always someone to ask her, sweet as poison, how her fine watchdog was keeping, and she would answer, in her plain, even way, that he was keeping well, thank you, and she would pay for her staples and go, and behind her the store would rock. But out on the price place a thing was happening that the store could not see, because the store never came out to look. The dog, who by midsummer she had at last let herself name Bracken for the color of him and the tangle he'd come out of, did not sleep at night the way other dogs slept. He worked the dark. She would wake at all hours to the sound of him out at the fence line, not the frantic yapping of a farm dog, but a low, deliberate barking that moved along the perimeter and then stopped and moved and stopped. A sound that said to every listening thing in that black country, I am here and I am awake, and this ground is spoken for. He patterned his patrols the way a man walks his own house in the dark, knowing every board. He marked the boundaries of her 160 acres as if he had surveyed them himself, and he laid himself down each dawn at the high corner nearest the wash, facing out, and slept the light hours with one ear cocked. And from the week he first took up his post, Marguerite Coyle did not lose one more lamb. Not one. The ewe that had been opened along the fence had been the last. Through all that summer, while Halbrook and the Ostranders and the rest ran their men and their rifles ragged and still counted their losses in the tens, the widow on the poor thin place counted hers at 0, and she said nothing of it, because who would she tell and who would believe her? And being right, she had long since learned, is its own kind of reply and needs no herald. It was in the deep of that first summer that the old man came. His name was Ili Voraru, and he had a small place 2 miles up the valley that he had held for near 50 years, come over from a country on the far side of the world as a young man, with nothing but a shepherd's knowledge in his hands. And he was old now, past telling, and lived alone with a few goats and a memory the length of the valley itself. The others treated him with a respect that had fear folded into it, for he saw things they did not, and said things that came true, and they left him mostly to himself. He came walking down the county road one evening in the long light, leaning on a staff worn smooth as a bone, and he stopped at Marguerite's fence and stood a while watching Bracken work the far corner, and when she came out to him he did not laugh. He was the first grown soul in the valley who had not laughed. He watched the dog a long time, and then he said, in the soft rolling way he had, that she had been told this dog was nothing, and that the ones who told her that were reading the dog the way a man reads a book upside down, seeing only marks, and calling it emptiness. This dog, he said, was not made by any man's breeding. This dog was made by the road, and the road is a harder school than any kennel, and it teaches only one lesson, and teaches it whole, which is how to keep alive the things that matter when nothing at all is given to you free. He tapped his staff once on the fence rail. The land, he told her, remembers what the farmer forgets, and the land does not shout its knowing. It only whispers it, once, to those who have gone quiet enough to hear. This dog had gone that quiet, in the dark of your pipe misses, he said. He had nothing left but listening, and now he listens for you. She kept those words the way she kept everything, folded away and turned over in the night, and they changed how she watched him. She stopped trying to train Bracken the way the book said. She stopped correcting him and directing him, and treating him as a tool she must operate, and she began instead simply to watch what he already knew, and to arrange her small world so that he could do it. Where he wanted to lie, she put no fence. Where he patrolled, she cleared the brush so he could move faster in the dark. She learned to read his silences, which were many, and his sounds, which were few, and each one different. And she learned that a certain low double note in the deep of the night meant he had cut a coyote's track along the wash and turned it back, and that she could sleep on that note as on a locked door. Old Voraru came by every week or two after that, and he would sit on an upturned bucket in the yard and drink her thin coffee, and tell her without ever seeming to teach the things he had learned in 50 years, that a flock settles under a good guardian, and settling ewes throw stronger lambs. That a dog that works from love holds ground, a dog that works from fear will give, and that a body that fights the country loses, and a body that listens to it lasts. She listened. She was, by nature and by grief, a listening kind of person. And that summer she did what none of the shouting men of the valley would ever think to do, which was to let the despised thing be exactly what its nature had made it, and to build everything else around that. There was a child, too, that summer, and I have not mentioned him yet, but he mattered as much as any grown soul in this. His name was Toby Ostrander, and he was 10 and the youngest of the Ostrander brood, from the Hartlock end of that family, the branch that had lost its own place, and worked now on shares. And he was a silent, watchful boy, who did not run with the other children, and had a way of appearing at the edge of Marguerite's fence and simply standing there. She let him be, at first, the way she let the dog be. Then one day she found him inside the fence, with Bracken's head in his lap, the two of them sitting quiet at the high corner facing out at the wash together. And the boy looked up at her and said, in the flat, blunt way of him, that this dog wasn't stupid like his uncle said. This dog was the smartest thing in the valley, and everybody was too dumb to see it. And Marguerite, who had not laughed nor cried in longer than she could remember, felt something turn over in her chest, and she said only that she believed the boy was right. After that, Toby came most days. He named the ewes, all 62 of them. Names only he could keep straight, and he learned to read Bracken's sounds nearly as well as she could, and he was in that lonely summer of scorn the one other living person who saw what she saw, and there is a kind of loneliness that a single seeing pair of eyes can break clean in two, and the boy broke hers. And she was grateful to him past any saying of it. Now the arithmetic began, slowly, to change its shape, because a flock that loses no lambs is a different animal than a flock that bleeds all summer, and come the fall. Marguerite Coyle brought 79 lambs to weight, where she had feared to raise 65, and every one of them fat and sound off grass that a settled, unfrightened flock had grazed clean and even. And when she ran the numbers at the stove that autumn, the shortfall was gone. Not turned to riches, gone, the stone was out of the boot. She had cleared her hay, and her taxes, and her note, with a little laid by, and she had done it on the poorest place in the valley, with the flock nobody wanted, and the dog everybody laughed at. And she told not a soul. She banked it the way you bank a coal, at night, raking the ash over it low so it shows no light but holds its heat till morning, because she had learned that a valley which laughs at your ruin will not forgive your success, and that a secret kept warm is worth more than a triumph spent loud. She let them go on pitying her. She let Halbrook go on with his jokes. And all the while, under the ash, the coal held its heat and grew. It was Bracken's second spring that brought the first stranger who could see. A buyer named Cathwood came up from the packing houses in the city, a hard, practical man who bought lambs by the trainload and had no time for valley gossip nor for anyone's opinion of anyone. And he was working his way through the outfits, taking his pick, and he came at last almost by accident to the price place, because someone had told him the widow had a few, and he might as well. He walked her small flock in the cool of the morning, and he grew quiet, and then he grew still, and he ran his hands over lamb after lamb, and looked in their mouths, and felt along their backs, and he asked her, lo, how in God's name she had brought lambs up this clean, and this uniform, and this unmarked, in a valley he'd just watched bleed all winter. And she told him the truth, plain that she had a good dog, and the dog kept them settled, and the settled kept them sound. Cathwood looked out across the fence to where Bracken lay at his corner in the morning sun, ragged ear and all, and he looked back at her, and he named a price for her whole crop that was better by a third than the top the valley had ever seen, and he paid it in the only language the scornful understand, which is money laid down flat and real. And it got about. Of course it got about that the city buyer had paid the widow a premium the big outfits couldn't touch, and for a week the store did not laugh quite so easy, and Dewart Halbrook did not tell the Culvert joke, and the arithmetic of the whole valley shifted a hair on its axis, though not one of them yet knew why, nor would let themselves guess. But money seen is money coveted, and here is where the second man of this story steps full into the light. And it was not Halbrook, for Halbrook was only a loud fool, and this man was a cold, clever one. He was called Pruitt Slane, and he was the field agent for the Cattlemen's Protective Association, which for all its fatherly name was a consortium out of the city that had spent a decade buying up the water and the grazing leases and the small broken outfits of 3 counties and knitting them into one great holding. And Slane was the smiling face they sent to do the buying. He wore pressed gray, and he shook a man's hand with both of his, and he called every rancher friend, and he had come into the Verrill Valley to consolidate it, the way he had consolidated the valleys east of it, one desperate signature at a time. He had watched the widow's premium sale with great interest, for Slane's whole business was the finding of a thing undervalued and the taking of it cheap before the seller understood its worth, and he came to the price place in his clean truck on a fine spring day and sat in her yard and told her, warm as summer, that the association admired what a woman alone had managed against such odds, and that they would like to take the burden off her, buy her out entire place, and flock, and he said, with a small nod toward the corner, that useful animal of yours, for a sum he named that was fair for the land and generous, he said, for the rest. And Marguerite Coyle, who did the arithmetic on everything, did it on this too, and she saw at once that the sum was fair for what she had been 2 winters gone, and nothing at all for what she had built. And she saw the shape of the man behind the smile, and she said to him, plain and even, just that. No, thank you. And Slane kept his smile, but something went behind his eyes like a shade drawn down, and he left his card and he said he'd call again, and the way he said it was not a warmth at all. He called again. He called all that summer, and into the fall, each visit a little less warm and a little more particular, and when buying would not move her, he began to do the other thing that men like Slane do, which is to poison the ground. It got about now, from a new direction, that the widow's lambs weren't so sound as they looked, that there was talk of sickness on the price place, that a dog off the road like that surely carried disease and oughtn't be let near the valley stock, that a woman who wouldn't sell to the association when every sensible neighbor had, was maybe not the good neighbor she pretended. None of it was true and all of it stuck, the way a burr sticks to a saddle blanket, and Marguerite felt the valley cool toward her again, felt the second thaw freeze back over, and she said nothing, because there was nothing to say that saying would help, and she banked her coal lower and kept her arithmetic and waited, because Voraru had told her, sitting on his bucket in the yard, that a lie runs fast on the flat, but the land is not flat. Mrs. The land goes up and down, and a lie tires on the climb, and the truth is, a patient walker. She held to that. She had cause to. For the land was climbing now toward something none of them saw coming, though the old man saw it, and the dog, in his way, saw it too. It came the following summer, Bracken's 3rd, and it came the way the worst things come. Slow, and then all at once. The rains failed in the spring. Then they failed in June, which the old-timers had never known them to do. And the creeks that fed the valley dropped, and the grass that should have stood knee-high by July stood ankle-high and gray, and by the middle of that summer the drought came down over the whole of the 3 counties like the open door of a furnace, a heat and a dryness so total that it stopped being weather and became a condition of the world. The wells went next, the shallow ones first, and then the deeper. And the great consolidated holding that Slane and his association had built on cheap bought water leases found that a water lease is only a piece of paper if the water underneath it has gone down into the dark. And the big outfits, Halbrook, worst of all, began to watch their stock die in the field for want of anything to drink, for grass had become a memory, and water had become a rumor, and a sheep will go a long while hungry, but a sheep will not go 3 days dry in that heat and live. The valley began to die around its edges, and then toward its middle, and the arithmetic that had ruled every man in it turned all at once to subtraction, only subtraction. Nothing but the counting of what was lost. And on the poorest place in the valley, there was water. There had been water all along, and this was the secret Marguerite Coyle had banked deepest of all, the coal beneath the coal. And to tell it right, I must take you back a year and a half, to the second spring, to a thing the dog did that she had told no living soul but the old man. Bracken, in his patient reading of that thin ground, had taken in the driest weeks of that earlier year to digging, always at the same spot, a low place in the far corner of the wash where no water showed and none ever had, and he would dig at it and lie in the damp cool of the hole he'd made and dig again, and Marguerite, who had learned to trust that this dog knew things she did not, had gone to old Voraroo with it, and Voraroo had come and knelt at the dog's hole and pushed his old fingers into the earth and smelled them and been quiet a long while. The dog smells the water your eyes can't find, he'd said at last. Down there, deep, but there. The land is whispering it, and only the dog is low enough to hear. And Marguerite had spent near the whole of her Cathwood premium every dollar of that first to profit on a well-man from beyond the valley to bring his rig out quiet in the off-season and drill at the spot the dog had chosen, and at 190 feet the man had struck a vein of water so cold and so steady it made his hard face soften. He said that ran deep beneath the whole east side of the valley, but broke close to the surface only here. Only at this one poor spot the whole world had written off. Only where a road dog had lain down in the dust and listened. She had capped it and piped it quiet to a stock tank screened behind a barn, and she had told no one. And she had gone on, letting them pity her thin, dry-looking place, banking that coal lowest of all, under all the rest of the ash, because a secret spring in a country of failing wells is not a thing you speak of until you know what you mean to do with it. And she had not yet known. Now the whole valley knew. Thirst, and she knew what she had. And into that reckoning came the first of the humbled. It was Toby's family, the Hardluck Ostranders, who came first, the boy's own father standing at her gate with his hat in his two hands and his pride broken all to pieces on the ground in front of him, come to beg water for the last of his stock, and unable to look her in the eye, this man whose brother had led the laughing 2 years gone. And Marguerite opened her gate and told him to bring his sheep and water them free, for the boy's sake and for his own. And she did the same for the next who came, and the next, quiet, one family at a time, asking nothing. Because the water under her ground was more than her small flock could ever drink, and she would be damned before she watched a lamb die of thirst 200 yards from a full tank over a matter of pride. But water shared quiet in a dying country cannot stay quiet long, and by August the whole valley knew that the widow on the Price place, the woman alone with the Culvert dog and the flock nobody wanted, had the only living water for 11 miles in any direction. And Pruitt Slane knew it too. Slane had known it, in truth, longer than she'd have guessed, and how he knew it is the hinge on which the whole of this turns, and you will see it turn soon enough. Slane moved the way his kind always move when begging and poison have both failed, which is to reach for the machinery of law and civic order and try to make the taking look like duty. He went to the county, to the emergency board they'd stood up to manage the drought, and he argued, gray and reasonable, that in a crisis of this magnitude, no single private party ought to control the region's last significant water, that it was a matter of public safety and equitable distribution, and that the association, with its resources and its infrastructure, was the natural and responsible steward to administer that water for the good of all, purchasing it from the widow at a board-set fair price and metering it out to the valley in an orderly way. It was a beautiful argument. It was consolidation, dressed as charity, the taking dressed as the saving, and it was very nearly going to work, for men who are dying of thirst will vote for whoever promises the cup, and the board called a public meeting at the fairground to settle the matter, and the whole valley came, 1,100 of them, and that is where you found us at the first. 1. In the wet blanket heat, with the flags hung dead on their poles, the widow in the ring and the dog beside her, and the man in gray sweating through his collar, all of them come to decide who should hold the water, and on what terms, all of them waiting on the verdict, none of them yet knowing that the verdict was long since passed. Slane spoke first, and he spoke well, all reason and regret, and he laid out the association's offer and its argument for public stewardship, and he was so very sure of the room that he made at the end one small mistake, the mistake that men who spy on their neighbors always make in the end, which is that he knew a thing too exactly. For he said, warm and grave, that everyone understood the widow's spring produced some 1,400 gallons the hour, more than enough for the valley if properly managed, and it was a true number. That it was the exact number the well man had read off his gauge. Alone at dawn, 18 months before, with no soul present but the driller and the widow and the dog, a number Marguerite Coyle had spoken to, not one living person. And when he said it, the old man Voraru, sitting in the front of the crowd on his smooth staff, lifted his white head and looked at Slane the way you look at a snake you have just heard move in the grass. And Marguerite heard it too, and she understood in one cold, clear instant how the association had known of her water in the first place, and how the rumors of her sickness and her bad lambs had been so exactly aimed that Slane had had a man on her ground, had bought or paid one of those who'd come for water to walk her place and read her gauge and carry the numbers back, that all his warmth had been a spyglass turned upon her all along. And she did the arithmetic on that too, standing in the ring, fast and final, and it came out clean. She let the silence stretch until it hummed. Then she spoke, and she did not raise her voice, for she never had and would not start now, and the 1,100 leaned in to catch it. She said that Mr. Fond, Slane knew the flow of her well to the gallon, and that she found that a curious thing, for she had never told it to any man, and that there were only 2 who could have carried him that number, and both of them had come on to her ground under the color of thirst. She let that land. She watched it land on Slane's gray face and watched the shade come down again behind his eyes. Then she said she would not sell her water to the association at any price the board could set, not because the price was low, but because the water was never hers to sell in the first place. It had come up out of the dark under the whole East Valley, she said, under all their feet alike, and a road dog too far gone to save had lain down and heard it whispering where every clever man among them had walked over it deaf for 50 years, and a thing found that way given, free, out of the dark to the one soul low enough to listen, could not in right be sold high to the desperate. She would not do it. What she would do, she said, was open her gate to every family in the valley, as she had already begun to do, and let them water their stock at her tank, for as long as the drought held and the vein ran, and she would ask of them only that they send a hand each week to help her keep the lines and the tanks clean. For water is labor to move and share, and a body ought to pay for the labor even when the water itself is a gift, and she would take nothing more than that, not a dollar. Not their land, nor their leases, nor their signatures on any consortium's paper. Only clean tanks and a fair share of the work. The turn came the way the old man had said, the truth comes patient, and then complete. It came first as a stillness, and then a man near the back took off his hat, and then another, and then it moved through that crowd of 1,100 like wind through the gray grass, hats coming off all across the fairground. And it was Deward Halbrook, ruined worst of any of them, who broke and spoke first, standing up, heavy and red and near to weeping, saying loud enough for all of them that he had called this woman a fool for 2 years, and it was the poorest arithmetic he had ever done in his life, that the fool had been him and every man who'd laughed with him, and that if there was a soul in the valley fit to hold the last water, it was the one who'd just given it away. And the fairground took it up, not in a cheer but in something graver. A low sound of assent that ran the crowd, and Pruitt Slane stood in the middle of it, in his pressed grey suit, with his beautiful argument gone to ash in his mouth. Done not by any law nor fist nor clever counterstroke, but by a plain woman's plain decency, laid out flat and real in front of 1,100 witnesses. And he understood that he had lost, and he gathered his papers with hands that shook a little now, and he walked out through a crowd that opened for him and closed behind him and did not look at him. And he drove his clean truck out of the Varro Valley and did not come back. The consolidation of the valley ended that afternoon in the heat, defeated by a thing no consortium can buy nor price nor put upon a paper. The rains came in the last week of September, all at once, a grey wall of them marching down out of the high country where the coyotes lived, and the creeks filled, and the grass came back green out of the dead grey in a matter of days the way it does after such a burning. And the valley that had watered its stock all summer at the widow's tank did not lose the flocks and herds it had been sure to lose, and every family in 3 valleys knew to the calf and the lamb exactly what her water had spared them, for they had done that arithmetic themselves. She was not the fool of the Varro Valley after that, nor the woman alone, nor the outsider stumbled in from wherever. She was Marguerite Coyle of the Price Place, and when she came to the feed store, now the room went quiet in a different way, a way with respect, folded into it the way fear had once been folded into their treatment of the old man, and the children ran to her truck, and Duard Holbrook carried her staples to the cab himself and would take no thanks for it. And the reclaiming of that phrase, a woman alone, was complete, for she was alone no longer in any way that the word had once been meant to wound. She had won the one thing she had crossed half a country grieving to find, which was not money, and was not victory, but was belonging. And she had won it in the single hour she'd held the whole valley's life in her hand, and chosen to open her fingers. Old Illy Voraru came down the county road one last evening that fall, slower now, leaning harder on the smooth staff, for he was very old, and would not see another summer, and both of them somehow knew it. He stood at her fence in the long green light, and watched Bracken work the far corner in the cool, the ragged ear up, the coat gone thick and good, the frame filled out at last to the 80 pounds. He was always meant to carry a dog no man in the valley would now call road trash. The boy Toby sat at the high corner with his arm over the dog's back, the two of them facing out at the wash together, the way they had since the first summer. And the old man said, soft in his rolling way, that she had learned the whole of it now. The one lesson, and would she like to hear him say it plain before he was gone? From saying anything, she said she would. He said the land remembers what the farmer forgets, and it does not shout its remembering, it only whispers, once. And the whole art of a life on the land is only this, to go quiet enough to hear the whisper, and humble enough to heed it. And the world will call you a fool for your quiet and your heeding, right up until the day it comes to your gate to be saved by them. You went that quiet, missus, he said, the day you lay down in the gravel and listened to a dying thing breathe, and the land has been whispering to you ever since, and you have heard every word. Then he touched his old hand once to the fence rail, and he turned, and he walked back up the county road into the falling light, and past the culvert where the dry wash ran, and out of this story. And Marguerite Coyle stood at her fence in the green and the cool, with her flock settled and safe on ground she had earned the right to stand on, and the boy and the dog at the far corner facing out at the country, the way they always would, and in the pen behind her the season's new lambs lay curled and breathing in the last of the light. And she counted them, out of long habit, the way she counted everything. And for the first time in her life the arithmetic came out to more than enough, and stayed there, and did not move.
I guess we don't have a spare barrel. I thought we did. Hmm. Wait, is there one in here? Oh, perfect. Yeah, I thought Raichu was following us, but I guess not. Just learned about present perfect in my English class. Class, why is it so difficult? Feel so dumb. You shouldn't feel dumb, Maju. English is stupid. So, okay, we'll move that over. I need that to look better. Hey, Ducky darling, and Brandy and Sumi-chan, thanks so much for the raid, guys. That's like so nice of you. Hopefully you guys are having a great day or night. Oh, thanks so much for the follow, Brandy. I need that to turn. No. I hate that. I hate that. Oh, thanks so much for the follow too, Ducky. There we go. It's like that needs to face a better direction. Okay, so